name's Professor Steve Thomas. I'm a Professor of Energy Studies at the University of Greenwich in London. I think the government's policy of not providing any public subsidies to nuclear power was essential from a political point of view, to get it past MPs who were sceptical about the nuclear programme and were aware of the poor history of nuclear power in this country and the large sums of money it had cost taxpayers. I don't think the policy of no subsidies is viable, however. I think the economics of nuclear power are too poor for the companies to go ahead without some form of public support, either from electricity consumers or from taxpayers. Even at that level, it didn't claim that nuclear power was economic. It claimed that with payment because nuclear power didn't emit carbon dioxide, it was just about economically viable. 2 years later, the government has acknowledged that actually the cost of building a nuclear power station will be double what it said only 2 years before. And actually, even that estimate is highly suspect. And if we look at international markets, it seems likely that the cost is going to be at least three times that the government forecast in only 2008. So the economic case for nuclear power, which on an unrealistically low assumption of the construction cost was poor, is actually going to be much poorer than that. A major element of the government's programme was that there would be new designs which would be safer, cheaper and easier to build than earlier designs, and that these would be available to start building perhaps in 2011. These new designs have turned out to be a great deal more problematic than was expected. The attempts to build new plants in Finland and France of these designs have been highly problematic. They've taken much longer to build than expected, and there have been huge cost overruns. There's also been difficulties convincing the regulators of the safeties of the design, and it now looks likely that the safety regulator won't complete approval of these designs until perhaps 2013. So probably the earliest we could start building is 2014 in this country. I think realistically, ministers and civil servants must have known that the policy of no subsidies was not going to result in new nuclear power stations if strictly applied. So we need to look at what sort of things the government might try to introduce as covert subsidies. And I think the big issue at the moment is the likely changes in the electricity system, in particular the reduction in the competitive elements of the electricity market, which makes nuclear power stations much more problematic. If nuclear has to compete in a market, then it has to be cheap. If you take away the market and you have a more planned system, then the risks of building nuclear power stations are much less. The Minister has already started to talk about things like capacity payments. So there will be a guaranteed payment for nuclear power stations, whether it generates electricity or not. And that will, of course, make it much easier to finance nuclear power stations, because banks will be able to see there is a guaranteed stream of income. It's not relying on an unpredictable market. I think most people assume that if a nuclear power programme has the backing of government and has large, powerful companies like Electricité de France or E.ON and RWE behind it, it's bound to happen. But I think that actually the people that decide are the financial institutions, the banks and the credit rating agencies. Companies like EDF and RWE and Aon have very large debts, and their finances are quite fragile, and if they take on risky projects, the cost of borrowing is going to be expensive and their credit rating will be at risk. So if the credit rating agencies don't like the risks involved in nuclear power programs and the banks don't like the risks, then nuclear power stations are not going to happen.